team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon. Juliet Smith from our sister station in Eugene spoke with one of the professors to learn more.
For decades, one idea dominated the story of the first Americans. It appeared in textbooks, museums, and classrooms across the world. The timeline seemed settled. Then archaeologists digging in a remote Oregon cave uncovered something nobody expected. It wasn't a weapon, a skeleton, or a lost settlement. It was something far less impressive at first glance, yet it carried evidence powerful enough to challenge one of the biggest assumptions in human history. What scientists found raised a disturbing question. If people were already here much earlier than believed, what else have we misunderstood about humanity's journey into the Americas? Paisley Cave's discovery and DNA evidence. In the dry, dusty layers of a remote Oregon cave called Paisley Caves, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected: preserved human waste, or coprolites, left behind thousands of years ago. What made this discovery remarkable wasn't just the rarity of finding such organic material intact, but the scientific analysis it sparked. DNA extracted from these samples revealed mitochondrial markers that match the founding Native American haplogroups, A2 and B2. This is not just DNA from any ancient group. It connects directly to the ancestors of indigenous peoples living in the Americas today. The researchers used accelerator mass spectrometry to date the coprolites themselves rather than the surrounding soil, eliminating the common objections about contamination or mixing of layers. The dates returned were staggering, over 14,000 years old, pushing human presence in North America back at least 1,000 years earlier than the previously accepted Clovis timeline. This means people were living and thriving in what is now Oregon long before Clovis spear points appeared anywhere on the continent. Despite the modesty of the find, a pile of dried waste rather than a weapon or grand artifact, the implications are enormous. This tangible piece of genetic evidence breaks the neat, tidy story that the first Americans arrived only around 13,000 years ago. Instead, it reveals a continuous lineage reaching back even further. The people who left this waste were not lost or isolated groups. They were the direct ancestors of living populations. Paisley Caves had been talked about for decades, but earlier trips never really went in far enough, or with the kind of care you want, to show this story. The usual belief was basically that the first Americans' question had already been sorted out a long time ago. Still, here, in these quiet layers people forgot about, there was proof that pushed back against years of textbook certainty. What seems like a small, subtle detail actually feels like the hinge for rewriting the earliest chapters of human time in the Americas. One of the strongest things about the Paisley find is how it holds up authentically. Different radiocarbon tests on separate samples kept giving consistent ancient dates. The labs ran double and triple checks. You know the methods, the controls, making sure it wasn't equipment trouble or contamination. The evidence ended up building a solid scientific base, so it couldn't just be brushed aside as a one-off anomaly or some mistake that somehow doesn't count. And then there's the DNA itself, tucked away in a spot where you don't find clear, direct artifacts. That changed the whole conversation. It shifted attention from tools or weapons to the people themselves. It gives a kind of human-scale picture of life: families, meals, everyday routines, even the quiet but powerful signature left behind by presence. In a way, it makes occupation not only a theory backed by objects, but also a living connection that survives inside the genetic code. Even if it's subtle and easy to miss, the Paisley Caves find has opened a door to tougher questions. Like, who exactly were these earliest inhabitants, and where did they come from? It made archaeologists look past objects and stare more closely at biology as evidence. And soon, this unexpected discovery was paired with other findings too, the kind that kept stretching the accepted timeline of human presence across the Americas. The implications of Paisley Caves ripple far beyond Oregon, signaling a major shift in our understanding of America's earliest settlers and the origin story of its first peoples. This leads us to another groundbreaking site nearby with equally compelling evidence: Rimrock Draw. Rimrock Draw and the volcanic ash timeline. 70 miles from Paisley Caves lies Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter, another quiet witness to ancient history with a story that complicates what we thought we knew. Unlike Paisley, Rimrock Draw didn't offer DNA, but instead provided something just as powerful, a firm geological timestamp beneath a layer of volcanic ash that blankets the site. This ash, traced to an eruption of Mount St. Helens roughly 15,500 years ago, acts like a firm seal in time, proving that anything beneath it must be older. This eruption sent a clear, physical marker drifting over the landscape, creating a lid over the soil that scientists can rely on with absolute confidence. Unlike organic materials that can be contaminated or move between layers, volcanic ash is immovable and unmistakable. It sets a boundary in the earth. What lies beneath is undeniably ancient, and what lies above is younger. This gives archaeologists a reliable clock they can't argue with. Beneath that ash, the excavation revealed fragments of tooth enamel belonging to Ice Age creatures like camels and bison antiquus, megafauna long extinct but once roaming the area. Alongside these fossils came tools crafted from orange chalcedony, glassy stones worked intricately into multi-purpose blades. One such blade, worn smooth from use, was likened to an early Swiss Army knife, showing signs of years of sharpening, cutting, and scraping by an owner long gone. The worn polish on the tool's edges tells a story way past just a simple find. It kind of hints at those close everyday habits, like a person carried this implement for years, constantly refining it and depending on it for survival. This sort of wear can't really be faked or rushed through fast. It's a direct line to a life lived tens of thousands of years ago. Living right beside extinct megafauna, this individual's tool predates even the volcanic ash itself, which sounds almost impossible at first. When the fossils and the tools were dated together, the radiocarbon results put everything between 21,000 and 22,000 years ago. That outcome really rattled the lead archaeologist, Patrick O'Grady, who checked the dates with extra caution multiple times. Having data like that is both exhilarating and honestly terrifying because it bumps into long-cherished academic ideas. Still, every test kept landing on the same answer. Humans were here nearly twice as long as anyone wanted to believe. Another surprising piece is that the tool style found at Rimrock Draw doesn't line up with Clovis technology or weaponry. Instead, it matches what researchers describe as the Western-stemmed tradition: long blades, weak shoulders, and rounded bases, like a separate lithic background that comes before Clovis by thousands of years. So the whole assumption that Clovis was the starting point for the earliest tool-making culture in North America gets shoved aside. So Rimrock Draw, in a way, confirmed and also widened the disruption that Paisley kicked off. It didn't just add proof of very ancient humans. It points toward a different group, living a different routine, more than 20,000 years ago. Their tools and presence nudge the timeline, and they also suggest there may have been multiple, possibly overlapping cultures across North America before Clovis. Together, Paisley Caves and Rimrock Draw dismantle the neat traditional chronology, forcing a reconsideration of how and when human beings first occupied this continent. This new timeline reshapes the next critical debate: the collapse of the Clovis First theory altogether. Challenging the Clovis First theory. For much of the 20th century, archaeologists believed the Clovis culture represented the first humans in North America. The theory was simple. Around 13,000 years ago, people crossed from Asia into North America through a frozen land bridge called Beringia. From there, they spread across an empty continent, leaving behind their famous fluted spear points. For decades, this idea shaped textbooks, museum displays, and the way people understood America's earliest history. But discoveries in Oregon began to challenge that story. At Paisley Caves and Rimrock Draw, researchers found evidence showing humans were present before Clovis technology appeared. This meant the Clovis people were not necessarily the first Americans. They may have been only one group in a much older and more complex story. The evidence from Oregon was especially powerful because it came in different forms. At Paisley Caves, ancient DNA showed a human presence older than the Clovis timeline. At Rimrock Draw, tools and fossils beneath volcanic ash pointed to activity that may have stretched even further back. Together, these discoveries suggested that people were living in North America earlier than many experts had accepted. At first, resistance was strong. Some archaeologists questioned the dating. Others worried about contamination or disturbed soil layers. These concerns were understandable because the Clovis first theory had dominated the field for generations. Accepting older evidence meant rethinking a major part of human history. But over time, more discoveries across North America began pointing in the same direction. Pre-Clovis sites showed that early human life was not simple or uniform. Different groups used different tools, followed different routes, and adapted to different environments. This changed the larger migration story. Instead of one fast movement through an ice-free corridor, researchers began considering multiple waves of migration. Some groups may have traveled inland, while others may have moved along coastlines by sea. The collapse of the Clovis first model did not erase the importance of Clovis culture. It simply changed its place in the timeline. Clovis was no longer the beginning of the story. It became one chapter in a much longer human journey. Oregon's discoveries opened the door to harder questions. Who were the people who came before Clovis? Where did they come from? How did they survive in Ice Age landscapes? And as researchers searched for answers, even more surprising evidence would soon appear far beyond Oregon. Moving from ancient tools and timelines to footprints frozen in time reveals a snapshot of families walking America during the depths of the Ice Age. Footprints at White Sands. In the vast white dunes of New Mexico's White Sands National Park, archaeologists uncovered one of the most remarkable discoveries ever made about early humans in North America: ancient footprints frozen in time. Researchers found 61 human footprints preserved in layers of ancient mud. These tracks were left by adults and children walking, running, and moving across the shores of a long-vanished Ice Age lake. Unlike stone tools or bones, footprints capture a moment of everyday life, offering a direct connection to people who lived thousands of years ago. What makes this discovery so important is its age. Multiple dating methods, including radiocarbon testing of seeds, pollen, and organic sediments, consistently placed the footprints between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. Scientists carefully cross-checked the results to rule out contamination, and the evidence continued to point to the same conclusion. The footprints were made during the height of the last Ice Age, thousands of years before the Clovis culture, which was once believed to represent the first people in the Americas. Initial skeptics suggested that ancient carbon in groundwater may have distorted the dates. However, additional testing using materials unaffected by groundwater produced nearly identical results. The findings became increasingly difficult to dismiss. The site revealed more than just a date or a simple clue. The variety and the sheer number of footprints kind of give off the idea that these weren't just a few isolated wanderers drifting through. Rather, it looks like a community kept coming back to use the landscape and somehow managed to get along, even though the Ice Age conditions were, honestly, pretty brutal. What makes it even more striking is that the human footprints showed up right near tracks from Columbian mammoths and giant ground sloths. Those huge animals once ranged across North America, and their impressions point to the fact that humans plus Ice Age megafauna were sharing the same general space at the same time, not, like, in theory only, but on the literal ground. This discovery pushes against older ideas that North America was mostly unoccupied during this stretch of time. Instead, it hints that people were already living, traveling, and making their way across the continent thousands of years earlier than what had been the standard assumption. And really, White Sands has turned into one of the most convincing bits in the fast-growing argument about when humans first arrived in the Americas. When you pair it with finds in Oregon and other places, it helps sketch a story that is older and also more tangled than many people used to think. If footprints preserve the presence of these early Americans in motion, then discoveries to the west reveal the tools they shaped and the landscapes they inhabited, pushing the timeline and complexity of human history even further back. California Mastodon Butchery Site. In Southern California, a freeway construction project uncovered something far stranger than expected: the partial skeleton of a mastodon, an elephant-like creature from the Ice Age. At first, it seemed like a normal fossil discovery, but researchers noticed unusual spiral fractures in the bones. These breaks usually happen when bone is still fresh, not dry or fossilized. That suggested the bones may have been deliberately cracked open to reach the marrow inside. Nearby, heavy stones were also found. Some researchers believe they may have been used as hammer tools, turning the site from a fossil bed into a possible butchery scene. Then came the most shocking detail: the date. Uranium-thorium analysis placed the remains at around 130,000 years old. That is far older than the accepted timeline for humans in the Americas. If the interpretation is correct, it raises enormous questions. Were humans, or another human relative, in North America much earlier than believed? How did they arrive? And why is the evidence so rare? The discovery remains controversial, but it continues to challenge the story of America's earliest inhabitants. This is why the California Mastodon site remains so controversial. Many archaeologists are cautious because the claim challenges decades of accepted research. Some argue the bones could have been broken by natural forces, while others believe the evidence points to intentional activity. Still, the site can't really be brushed off. If you look at it together with what's been found in Oregon and New Mexico, it kind of hints that the whole early people story in North America might be way older than we used to say, and also more tangled too. Rather than a clean, simple migration over a land bridge, the clues point towards some bigger riddle involving different groups, different corridors, and maybe even movement into the continent that happened far earlier. The California Mastodon butchery place makes researchers pause and adjust how they think about timing, not just when humans showed up in the Americas, but also how they managed to live, how they moved, and how they adapted once everything changed. No matter if the site turns out to be proof of truly ancient humans or just a stubborn, unresolved puzzle, one thing stands out: the old storyline doesn't cut it anymore. The first chapters of America's human past may be more odd and more distant in time than anyone expected. This growing mountain of evidence invites a radical rethink of accepted migration routes and dating, unfolding in the next chapter, focused on how early peoples might have made their journeys across oceans and continents. Rethinking human migration routes. For decades, historians believed the first Americans crossed a land bridge called Beringia from Siberia and then traveled south through an ice-free corridor. It was a simple explanation and became the dominant theory for how people first reached the Americas. But discoveries in Oregon, New Mexico, and California are changing that story. New evidence suggests the peopling of the Americas was far more complex than a single migration. Archaeologists now believe some of the earliest humans may have traveled by sea, moving along coastlines in small communities equipped with boats rather than crossing frozen land routes. Genetic research supports this idea. Studies point to two major migration waves from East Asia. The first may have begun around 26,000 years ago, with people gradually traveling along coastal routes across the Pacific and settling new areas over many generations. A second migration happened roughly around 15,000 years ago. This group is usually linked with the Clovis culture, which, for a long time, was treated as the first Americans. Nowadays, a lot of researchers think they showed up thousands of years later than earlier coastal settlers, kind of pushing the timeline farther in. The implications are massive. If these early migrants were true seafarers, it hints that humans became skilled at open water travel way sooner than people used to say. Stuff from places like Crete indicates sea crossings perhaps as early as 130,000 years ago, so it kind of bumps into what we assumed about early human know-how and flexibility. Stone tools give more leads too. Artifacts from Oregon's Western STEM tradition look a lot like tool styles seen in East Asia and even Japan, which implies social ties that might have moved along maritime corridors. So the old Clovis first idea is quickly losing ground. The tale of the first Americans doesn't read like one tidy trip across a frozen land bridge anymore. Instead, it feels more like a patchwork of migrations, with separate groups arriving at different times, using different strategies. Today, the largest question isn't just when humans arrived in the Americas, but how they pulled off one of humanity's biggest migrations. Honestly, the discoveries from Oregon and beyond upend everything we thought we knew about the first Americans. Ancient DNA, volcanic ash, footprints, and butchered bones tell a story of early peoples who arrived thousands of years earlier by land and sea, forging a complex history of migration and survival. If this reshapes your view of human origins, like and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of our past. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.